on fire this morning because what I realized is the reason why I know this whole case is bullshit is because what we haven't asked is the same thing that has been uncovering a lot of truths about this case for at least the last 3 months, and that is what is missing. So, in Justin Baldoni's case, here's the situation. I, I've been so upset that Jennifer Freed published that expert report and submitted it as a part of this case. It's embarrassing. If I had now seen the unsealed documents, I would be doing everything in my power to rescind that report and to disassociate my connection with this case or Blake Lively's claims. It is embarrassing because to think that Jennifer Freed developed that theory based off of what she saw in the Anita Hill case and was now trying to transfer and apply that to the Justin Baldoni situation, give me a break. It basically shows that she has no understanding or recognition or respect for power dynamics in trauma and abuse, and it makes me furious. And the reason why I'm saying that asking the question of what is missing proves that Justin Baldoni is not an abusive person and is not the person capable of doing what Blake claims is the fact that what is missing is the behaviors of an abusive person. And listen to the rest of what I have to say, because if you're still of the mindset and the camp that thinks like two things can be true, Justin Baldoni could have done these things and he could like all of this could happen and Blake can still be a bad person. The problem is the biggest thing that is missing is the behavior of an abusive person. Because I started to question what would it look like if Justin Baldoni had factually done these things, and if we are maybe doing a disservice to a survivor of, sexual harassment or abusive behaviors, and what if we are being head faked by the narrative of all of this and we're missing something that has not yet been uncovered. And the problem is that there is no behavior that specifically defines Justin Baldoni as being abusive, and it makes my stomach turn in knots to think that so many people have bought into the whisper network that Blake has started and activated against him, Jamie Heath, and Wayfair. And the reason for that is because when you're in an abusive relationship, this is something that stands out to me, and I remember so deeply and viscerally from my abusive relationship. And it's because when I first started going to my regular therapist, not my trauma counselor, my regular therapist, my first meeting with her, she asked me over our hour-long appointment, like, what is it that you're here for? What do you want to work on? What are the issues that you're facing? And when I unloaded everything to her, because this was immediately on the heels of my recognition that I was in an abusive relationship and that the violence and harm that I had just experienced that escalated over time, and I was very raw and just triggered and beyond the capacity that I could hold all of these emotions. And she sat there and listened to everything that I had to say, and I told her about the violence and harm that I had endured and experienced. And she looked at me and she very matter-of-factly said, "It sounds like we need to work on your self-advocacy, because it sounds like you weren't effective in letting your person know what your boundaries and rights were." And I knew in my body immediately that that was wrong. I knew immediately, and it activated me in a way that I was not prepared for. And I had to go back to my trauma therapist almost the same day because I was so activated and hurt, and I genuinely felt betrayed by that statement. And what my trauma counselor let me know is that she was like, that is absolutely wrong. And she told me, what I will let you know is that counselors, oftentimes, if they are not specialized in trauma and abuse, this is an area that consistently happens with survivors of abuse, is that a person who's not specialized in trauma and abuse will misread things and will do and say things that actually worsen and deepen the harm that survivors have endured in their relationships. Because what they don't understand, if they have not specialized in trauma and abuse specifically, is that an abuser only believes that a victim deserves or is entitled to the things that they believe that victim has earned or has the right to, and they can revoke that at any time. And so, as an example, what is missing here is the escalation, and the escalation attached to entitlement. And here's the bigger problem. This is why I know it doesn't exist in this situation with Justin Baldoni. It's because when you listen to the depositions of Colleen Hoover, Jenny Slate, Blake Lively, all of these people, at no point do you hear any of them talk about how unsafe they felt. And we would factually not even be in this case at all if Justin Baldoni were factually an abusive man. And that's because an abusive man has a severe sense of entitlement. And anytime that somebody encroaches on that entitlement, that is what triggers and escalates that abusive person. And at no point do we ever see where that sense of entitlement from Colleen Hoover, Blake Lively, Jenny Slate, or any of these women ever gets triggered or causes him to escalate. Instead, what we see is Justin Baldoni constantly trying to feed the insatiably hungry entitlement of all of these women. He's constantly bending over backwards and trying to do things to build trust and try to regain the rapport between them. And instead, they take it as reason to believe, like, I'm uncomfortable with what he's saying. And they were uncomfortable not because he was being abusive, not because he was sexually harassing them. Instead, they were uncomfortable because they believed that his statements of feminism meant that, one, he should fall on the sword for them whenever something was happening or going awry that made people scrutinize them as women more. And at no point did they ever feel like if they said something or did something wrong, that he was going to become explosive and abusive about or towards them. Instead, they felt entitled. They felt entitled to have everything, to benefit from everything. And if they didn't, that is how they were uncomfortable with his statements of being a feminist. They thought that him being a feminist meant that he had to take all of the punishment and all of the abuse for anything that was ever perceived as wrong or bad in relation to this project. And that is not what feminism is. And again, what's missing is the fear and the escalation. The strongest that we hear from Justin Baldoni is from Colleen Hoover, in that she says it's not that they think that she's a narcissist, but she's behaving narcissistically. That is the strongest statement that we hear from Justin Baldoni about Blake and her behavior. That is not how an abusive person speaks. In fact, we would not be in this case at all if Justin Baldoni were abusive, because the moment that he felt that his entitled behavior was being encroached upon, that is when he would have revoked any of their autonomy, revoked any of their safety. Because in my situation, I knew at the subconscious level that I had a right to safety. And when my person would escalate, I would make the decision that I have to get away from this. And that is when my autonomy and my entitlement, my right to safety, would be revoked, and the escalation would end up in violence. We don't see that with Justin Baldoni. Darvo cannot be applied here. He's not an abusive person. He doesn't ever escalate. That is the biggest thing missing in this entire case. It's bullshit.